Okay, so hello everyone. I'm James Shaheen. I'm Tricycle's editor. We're joined today by Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goldstein, co-founders of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. Sharon is most recently the author of Real Change, and Joseph's most recent book is Mindfulness, A Practical Guide to Awakening. His seminal book, The Experience of Insight, was recently reissued. So if you want to sit a 30-day retreat at home, pick up a copy or go to Amazon and you'll find it there. Sharon and Joseph will be leading an online retreat from October 27th through October 30th. We've provided a link to that in the chat, and we'll do it again at the end of this session. And we thought it'd be a good idea to get a taste of what they'll be teaching as we approach what promises to be a very high anxiety election. We'll start with a meditation. Sharon will lead that. I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll invite our audience to ask their own questions. You can do that by posting your question in the Zoom Q&A panel using the button below the video screen. So Joseph and Sharon, thank you for joining us.
James.
I can't think of a better time to meditate, so I guess, Sharon, you'll begin.
Sure, thank you so much. It's actually great to see you. Let's sit together. As I've been saying, as I teach, one of the things that I'm really counting on cultivating in this time is some sense of rest, not shutting off thoughts and emotions and other things, but just getting some space through centering more. And I'd like us to do a little practice like that. The operative word really is rest. We choose an object of awareness like the feeling of the breath, if that works for you, and we rest our attention on it. If the breath doesn't work for you for whatever reason, just some other sensation in your body, maybe your hands touching or something that's actually happening, so you don't have to fabricate it or make it happen. So you can sit comfortably, close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. You can start by listening to sound, whether it's the sound of my voice or other sounds. It's another way of relaxing deep inside, allowing your experience to come and go. Of course, we like certain sounds and we don't like others, but we don't have to chase after them, to hold on or push away. Just let the sounds wash through you. And bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. You can feel the earth supporting you. You can feel space touching you. And bring your attention to the feeling of your breath, just the normal, natural breath. You don't have to make it deeper or different. Just however the breath is appearing and wherever it's strongest for you. Nostrils, chest, or abdomen. And remember to rest. It's just one breath. You don't have to be concerned with what's already gone by. You don't have to lean forward for even the very next breath. Just this one. And just images and sounds and sensations and emotions may arise. If you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. They can come and go. You don't have to follow them and you don't have to fight them. It's just this. And if you get lost in thought or spun out in a fantasy or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. Once you realize you've been gone, see if you can let go gently. And without judgment, just bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation.
Thank you, Sharon. That was very nice. It's always nice to sit. Okay, so I was wondering if you could talk about what you'll be teaching next week. And for those of us who attended your last retreat, how this one will be different. Sharon, do you want to start?
All right, well, I was looking at Joseph to see if he wanted to start.
Maybe Joseph, it's up to you guys. You're the teachers.
You can start and I'll dive in.
Sure. First, I want to say, now just glancing at the chat and seeing that people are tuning in from Argentina and New Zealand and Montreal and all over the States and Brazil and UK and Switzerland. It's kind of amazing. So I just feel very touched by that and the community that we form together. So partly because of that, I've really enjoyed being able to teach online, and the center's closed anyway. So there's no choice, but I see the positive in it quite a lot. And I think there is a tremendous power in being able to gather and practice together. And one of my things, anyway, in terms of mindfulness, even though the word can be defined so many different ways, something I often talk about is how in the popularization of mindfulness practice, so often what's emphasized is something that's actually quite good, which is inhabiting your life more fully. Not always multitasking, really tasting that tea when you're drinking it, because you're not also checking your email. And it's really like being alive in a whole other way. And obviously that's a really positive thing. But classically, while that might be appreciated, the ultimate purpose of mindfulness is not actually inhabiting your life, it's understanding your life. It's having insight or wisdom, both on a personal level. I often talk about what it's like when I look at my own fear and where it seems to originate, and not because I'm trying to analyze it, but just because I'm paying attention. So maybe very personal insights and also universal insights about the truth of change and interconnection and things like that. And so we wanted to have an online retreat that really emphasized insight.
Joseph?
Yeah, so just to build on what Sharon said, there's so many different dimensions to the Buddhist teaching. And as Sharon indicated, there's a lot about just living more easily and peacefully in the world. And there's also teachings that we could call it the teachings of liberation, teachings which actually free the mind from the root causes of suffering, which, in the Buddhist understanding, come down to greed and hatred and delusion. And these are the forces in all of our minds, to some extent or other, which result in harmful action in the world. And so the liberation teachings really have to do with the understanding of these forces and the potential we all have for actually freeing our minds from them. So my hope in this course is to actually dive in a little bit deeper into what Sharon referenced, kind of the characteristics, the universal characteristics of experience, like impermanence and what's sometimes translated as unsatisfactoriness. The Pali word for that is dukkha, and selflessness. And we may have some kind of conceptual understanding of these, particularly, impermanence, which is not hard for us to understand, and even things being unreliable. We can have a pretty easy connection with understanding that. When we get into the understanding of selflessness, of course, that is not so easily understood. That's a bit counterintuitive. And so what I'd like to do is to dive into different of these characteristics and see how they interrelate. The Pali word for that unreliability is dukkha. And this is a hugely important word in the Buddhist teachings. The whole Four Noble Truths revolve around that word. There's the truth of dukkha, the cause of dukkha, the end of dukkha, and the way leading to the end of dukkha. And sometimes it's translated as suffering, but that's a very limited translation, really. It has much broader meanings. And so I think we'll have the opportunity in the course to dive into the deeper meanings of all this, how these characteristics relate to one another, and perhaps most importantly, how we can hear the teachings or use the teachings to experience them for ourselves. So we take it from that conceptual level of understanding to something that we actually taste for ourselves in our own experience. And I think that there are many ways to do this, and we'll be exploring that during this course. So I'm quite excited by the possibility.
And going back to mindfulness for a moment, like one of the, or several of the ways that the word is described are accurate, but I think also can lead to a lot of misunderstanding. I even used, without judgment. So sometimes people say mindfulness means being with our experience without judgment, or mindfulness means accepting things as they are. It can also sound a little bit passive and kind of dull, actually. And when I was in India, below those many years ago, first practicing, which is where I met Joseph in January of 1971. The word was often described as a compound. It was sati, meaning mindfulness, sampajanya, which is clear comprehension. So there's a kind of almost like a brightness of looking. It's taking an interest in your experience. Like, what really causes me suffering? Is it, the things that I were taught were actual strengths like resentment or vengefulness, how happy do they make me? You know, because we can take a look. And what about the things I maybe was taught were stupid and sentimental, like loving kindness or compassion? Do they really? So we get to see for ourselves and be able to discern how we want to craft our lives. And then we also see, well, who am I really? You know, am I who I've always assumed, like in control or, you know, whatever those sort of assumptions are? And, you know, what is life actually? And what can I hold on to successfully? And so many things that we really get to take a look at through the power of our own awareness.
Thank you both. You know, as you were talking, I thought of something. Sharon, you mentioned acceptance, and Joseph, you mentioned a conceptual understanding. And what I always find valuable in retreat is that you kind of discover how, to what extent your understanding is conceptual and to what extent it's experiential. So an example, the other day, I had a cup that somebody had given to me, and I remember buying it. We bought it together. He's no longer with us. And the other day I dropped it and it broke. I mean, it broke beyond repair. I was so upset. And I realized, well, what did I expect? For it to never break? So can you say a little something about conceptual understanding and what we get to experience in retreat?
Yeah, so I think this really ties in very closely to our exploration of both the impermanence of everything, of all conditioned things. They are going to change. And just with relationship to the story you just told, there is the famous story of, you know, the Thai master Ajahn Chah. He gave this teaching, which really highlights just that understanding. He held up a cup and he said, "What's the best way to relate to this cup?" And he said, "The best way to relate to the cup is as if it's already broken." You know, and this doesn't mean that we don't take care of it and we don't use it, you know, so we do all of those things. But in our minds, we understand that it is already broken, you know, that it is going to change, it is going to fall or break or just get old and cracked. So that realization, actually bringing it into our lives in the midst of all our experiences, you know, that they're already over. You know, even as we're going through them. So then we engage in a full way, and in a way, as Sharon mentioned, with discernment, but without attachment. And of course, this is the whole key, because I think we can all understand conceptually that if we're holding on to that which in its very nature will change, we're going to suffer. So we can know that intellectually, and then it's applying in the midst of our daily experience, whatever they may be, whatever the experiences are arising in our lives, to understand this. And so that's really bringing it into our felt lived experience. And we'll be going into this, you know, and I think giving examples in how we actually can experience this for ourselves in a real and liberating way. You know, it's freeing to the degree that we can let go of our attachments.
I mean, if there ever was a time in life, in society, that we're up against that, it's this, you know. And I've often said that as Joseph knows, and James may know as well, actually, as both being friends, I'm very fond of New Year's Eve. I just love that sense of new beginnings in a year, even though it's just a, you know, construct. It's like the year's over and we're starting over, and it's so great. And I've often said, as a Jew and a Buddhist and an American, I get 3 a year, which makes me very happy. So recently, I had to look up somebody's email address, and so I'm just, you know, going through my old email, and the last time she wrote to me was New Year's Eve. And it was all like, I can't wait for 2020. You know, 2019 has been kind of rough, and the glory of 2020 is about to dawn, and it's going to be such a relief, you know. And I was like, oh, God, you know, guess what? It didn't work out that way.
Right. You know, one thing you said, Sharon, when like, who am I? I mean, I think from sitting on retreat, and this may not be helpful. I don't know if it's not, we can move on. But I remember sitting once on a metta retreat with you, Sharon, and I remember that question, who am I? And I shifted from who am I to what am I? And then I shifted from what am I to what is this? Which was helpful to me. I wonder if either of you could say something about that. One of you told me that, I don't remember which.
Yeah, well, I think that was really a good shift, James, in the direction of really understanding in a more personal way what selflessness means. You know, because even in our language, we construct our experience around the subject I, you know, and an action and an object. And so we're reinforcing this sense of I am throughout the day. This is just our normal way of moving through the world. And so, similar to what you just said, I have an exercise what I call from am to is. That is, whenever we're going through the day, I'm walking, I'm thinking, I'm eating, whatever, to change the am, there is walking, there is eating, there is this, there is. And so that begins, in a way, to show us the impersonal nature of experience, but it doesn't mean withdrawal or detachment, right? It really, this is itself an important distinction between detachment and non-attachment. You know, because when we hear the word detachment, often it feels like we're pulling back from experience or maybe not caring, but really that's not what the essence of the teachings is at all. That it's about non-attachment. So we're fully there, we're fully engaged, but not holding on. And that just what you said really can help us do that. Or there's anger rather than I am angry, or anger is like this, you know, or joy is like this. So that really is bringing in a quality of investigation and understanding, very different than when we're just kind of subsumed by the sense, oh, I'm so angry or I'm so happy. You know, we get out of the contraction of self into a more universal experience.
Okay, so before we go to questions from our audience, I just want to say one thing. You know, when you do a retreat from home, of course, you don't have the luxury of being in the kind of container that we're in when we're, say, at our retreat centers. And I found that being very disciplined, since I was not able to shut out my daily life completely, to be very disciplined about putting time aside. I got far more out of it because the first few retreats, very short, that I did virtually, there was no container, and I had to create my own. Could you, Sharon, or Joseph, either one of you, say something about what might be helpful, since many of us are doing online retreats?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much variation that we just have to understand our circumstance. You know, like one of the things about the IMS retreats, like the one we're doing, is that you can listen to them. I think it's for 30 days or something like that afterwards, because I find that I myself am having a hard time always, listening to the things I want to listen to just when they're live. And then I'm catching up a lot, and it's just life circumstance. So that could be fine. Some people, everyone is so different. Some people have a lot of childcare, or some people are alone. And one of the things that I think people are struggling with often in this time is that there's very little external structure for a lot of people. And so we have to create the structure ourselves. And it could be, we set out a schedule where either Joseph or I or the women we're teaching with are presenting and guiding and answering questions and things like that. And then there's the rest of the day. And we do have options that we suggest. If you want to do a period of walking meditation, this would probably be a good time. If you want to do an extra couple of sittings, this would be a good time. Think about it, depending on your own circumstance. And I think either way you end up doing it, it can be a very enriching experience.
I'd like to also give a plug for actually doing some walking meditation. because the guided parts of the course will either be a presentation or some guided sits. And so the walking would be really something you would have to do on your own, although there will be walking instructions, for the walking meditation. But sometimes people think that walking practice is somehow secondary to sitting, and the real meditation is sitting, and then walking is something to do to give yourself a break between sittings. But actually the walking practice is hugely valuable. I mean, and just over all the years of my practice, in some way I've learned certainly as much and sometimes even more in the walking than in the sitting. And it's tremendous training for how to practice mindfulness as we move through the day. Because the more we do the walking meditation, it's almost as if being mindful of the body in movement, whenever we move, becomes the default setting for us. Having practiced the formal walking meditation, it's like that neural pathway, gets deepened, and we're just in the habit of every time we take a step, from one room to another, or at work, or in whatever we're doing, every time we take a step becomes a time of mindfulness. So it's tremendously valuable, and I would really encourage people, whether you join the course or not, to actually just devote some time to walking practice, because it's very enriching.
And if you can't walk, and we also offer instructions, like if you're in a wheelchair, something like that, the idea is really taking the qualities of mindfulness and balance and compassion and so on that we're cultivating in sitting into activity, so that it becomes more seamless in terms of our day-to-day life.
Okay, well, thank you both. Again, if you do want to attend the retreat, we'll put the link in the chat again. And if you miss it, you can always go to dharma.org for this retreat or many others that IMS has on offer. I'm sure I'll be at this one. Nancy asks from our audience, with regard to non-self, when I am practicing metta and wishing loving kindness to myself, how does this reconcile with the notion of non-self?
Well, first we should say metta is M-E-T-T-A, and it means loving kindness. It's a word in Pali, the language of the original Buddhist text, and the literal meaning of it is friendship, but the word I tend to use is connection. All of them are fine. I use loving kindness a lot too, but my concern about friendship, which is the literal translation, is that it's really a state of the heart. It's not about an action. Sometimes people say, well, were I to develop a more loving heart or more metta, I can only say yes, I can only give you more money, I can only lend you the car again, I can only let you move back in or whatever. But it's not that it demands a certain action. And I think of friendship as like, let's take a walk together, socially distanced, or let's hang out together. And so it's a recognition of how powerfully connected our lives are, whether or not you like somebody. It's that recognition. And sometimes we talk about two aspects of reality or two levels of reality, the relative and the absolute. The relative and the absolute don't negate one another. They actually are intertwined. It's like two faces of something. So we talk about no self, which doesn't mean if you have that insight, you kind of disappear into a blob, that something melts away, something that was solid and substantial beforehand. It means that we tend to have misconceptions about who we actually are. And we believe there's an ability to be in control, to be all powerful, that something is discrete and independent rather than interdependent. And that's a myth. And the more we can be mindful, the more we see, oh, that's not actually how things are. We live in an interdependent universe. So, and that's the level where we mostly see process. On the relative level, I'm me and you're you, and we're working it out, whatever we're doing, and actions have consequences, and that is also real. And one of our problems is that both we misunderstand that level in terms of action having consequences, but we also think it's the only level of life. So sometimes I say, like, you can look at a tree and see just the tree, and that's true. It's like a singular entity staying there. Or you can look at the tree and get a sense of the soil that is nourishing it and everything that affects the quality of that soil, like the rainfall, and everything that affects the quality of the rainfall. So you can look at the tree and get a sense of a network of relationship, which is also true. So we look at different levels at different times, and you can say metta or loving kindness works on the level of relative truth, certainly in terms of language. But you wouldn't want to. It would be very awkward to say, and even the Buddha did not say, the psychophysical bundle of constantly changing elements coming and going due to cause and effect is moving over there, or has a birthday today. We don't talk like that. So it's a practice that takes place on a real level of how we interact.
Just as one example of how we can understand how this relative and more ultimate levels are not separated, they're actually part of the same thing. If you just think of, maybe we can go back to Ajahn Chah's cup, holding up the cup, but this in a different context. So, you have a cup and you use it and you take care of it and you wash it. But if you looked at that cup under a high power microscope, cup would disappear. There would be no cup. You would be seeing a whole other level of reality, of electrons and atoms, and depending on how strong the microscope is, really get into maybe the subatomic particle level, where there's no cup on that level. And yet, the cup is not apart from that. It's just, as Sharon was just saying, it's a different level of perception. The value of seeing this more ultimate level is that when we really can experience that with regard to whether it's the cup or what we're calling ourselves, having really experienced the more ultimate level, then we use the cup, we appreciate it, but we don't have the same attachment to it, because we understand that it's only a relative level of perception. And there's another way of understanding it, which is quite different. So this gets extremely interesting when we begin to see this in terms of our own mind-body process, of everything we're calling self, and just investigating, going deeper, okay, what is it that we're calling self? So this becomes a hugely interesting investigation and exploration, which I hope we'll be doing, to some extent during the course.
I think you anticipated and answered the next question by Anonymous, which is, why do we need to be careful with the cup if its very nature is to break?
Because if you're thirsty, you want to be able to use it to drink. The relative level is not unimportant. We're living on this level. In fact, we're living on it mostly. This is the world we live in. However, as I just said, the deeply understood insight into the emptiness of it allows us to use these things, as I said, without attachment, without clinging. But we definitely want to be able to take the drink.
Okay, so Jill asks, I'm in Grand County, Colorado, which currently has a deadly wildfire burning. I'm on the current safe side of the county, but at this moment, a fire is beating all the firefighting efforts. My anxiety is sky high. Highways are closed. Even if I were more able-bodied, I could not get there. So many are in harm's way. I'm sending loving kindness toward all in the path of danger. I feel so helpless. Any insight is much appreciated.
Yeah, I think that if we look at the root of a lot of really turbulent and difficult emotions, anger, grief, fear, we see a sense of helplessness often. And I think falling into it is one of the most corrosive sort of environments we can be in. I think that if one is sitting, say, with a tremendous amount of anger or ill will, and you find that kernel of helplessness in it, then that's the signal to try to take some small action toward the good. I mean, seemingly small action toward the good. We actually don't know, but a lot of times people I find don't do anything because it feels like whatever they can do is not significant enough. But it is, it's very meaningful to take one even seemingly small action toward the good. If you're sitting there, just distraught and upset about something, but feel helpless, again, if you can find that sense of helplessness and pay attention to it, then it's the same kind of signal. And if there's nothing you can do, reaching out to somebody or trying to help somebody, I think loving kindness is an important thing to do. And I often use it when I don't know what else to do, because it's an energetic connection. It's a way of paying attention, maybe to something that it's so much easier not to pay attention to. The society is filled with distraction and invites us all the time. Don't look at hard things. Don't look at your own hard things. Don't look at other people's hard things. Don't look at this planet. Don't look at what's happening. Look somewhere else, buy something else. And I find myself that in order to keep looking and paying attention to something distressing, that loving kindness is a tremendous asset to help create a context for that.
And maybe just to build on that a little bit, the Buddha taught these 4 different kinds of meditations, which he called the divine abodes. So loving kindness is one, and there's compassion, and then empathetic joy, and equanimity. So especially in these challenging times, and particularly in the situation you described, first, I think it's to understand and appreciate your willingness to open to the suffering that's there, because as Sharon said, so often we're just conditioned to turn away from it. But instead of being overwhelmed, as we open to it, the compassion practice, as a meditation, would be the really simple phrase, repeated, may you be free of suffering, may you be free of harm. And so we're cultivating that quality of compassion and care, first in our own hearts and minds, and then the phrase I love for expressing the possibility of compassionate action, it's almost become my mantra of compassion, is how can I help? Just so the fact that you're willing, that you have been willing and have opened to the realization of the real danger that people are in and the suffering that people are in, but then instead of going to despair or helplessness, maybe just to hold that phrase almost like a koan, okay, well, how can I help? And maybe there are some specific actions, and just as Sharon said, maybe it's doing just the metta practice or compassion practice. May you be free of danger, may you be free of suffering. And you could actually spend some extended period of time in this meditation, whether it's 15 minutes or half an hour or longer. And that really transforms then the way we're holding the situation of suffering. So it's a very transformative practice, and it just makes more space within us to see what kind of help is possible.
Great, thank you both. Another question from Anonymous. How can we tell the difference between checking out, numbing out, and bypassing experiences of this in this intensely political time, and slowing down, healthily disengaging, and taking a rest? Sometimes I confuse the latter with the former.
Well, I'll just jump in quickly. Maybe Sharon will have more to say about this. So I think there's kind of a middle ground between being overwhelmed and checking out, and the mechanism, for me anyway, in these times when it's very easy to fall into one or the other of those extremes, you know, either being overwhelmed by everything that's happening, you know, or yeah, I can't deal with this anymore, is to titrate the amount of information that we're receiving. Because as we all know, in these times, there's a flood of information with all our devices. You know, we're getting flooded by so much news of all kinds, and it can be too much. You know, we're not giving ourselves a rest. So it doesn't mean that we want to turn it all off. We want to stay connected, and we also want to do it in a way that we don't get overwhelmed. You know, and so just a simple titration. How many times a day do we check, you know, the news feed, and just find out what actually works for you?
Yeah, and I would say, you know, one of the ways compassion is defined in the teachings is as the trembling or the quivering of the heart in response to seeing pain or suffering. So it's a movement of the heart, and it's a movement toward to see if we can be of help. So that implies energy, right? Rather than utter depletion or exhaustion. That implies usually some kind of balance, because we're moving toward to see if we can be of help, not with sort of a determined savior complex. And we're moving toward rather than into to be destroyed ourselves, you know. So and one's own mindfulness, I have found, is the great ability to be sensitive, to feel. It's just like Joseph said, like I was interviewed for this article on doom scrolling, which was the first time I ever heard the word, which I thought, what a great word. I had to say, what does that mean? And, you know, it means like you're just repetitively, constantly looking at one bit of bad news, and there's plenty of it, but often it's the same story. It's like you're not just reading that story once and trying to take it in, you're reading it 30,000 times, you know, and you do end up depleted and unable to kind of move toward or to care anymore because it's too much. And we can tell, you know, we can feel the effect. And the irony of the doom scrolling article was that I was told by the journalist that I was recommended by a colleague of mine, not Joseph, a different colleague. And then when the article came out, I saw I was in it and she was not. Then I thought, I wonder why she recommended me. I wonder if she suspects I do it, you know, while she does not. And so, you know, and I mean, you know, as my friend James, that I really try not to watch the news on TV. Oddly enough, I get it all from Twitter, which some people would assume would be like the death knell to any kind of balance of mind. But I have a lot of more control, you know, like I don't want to click on that, or I've already read that and I don't need to like go through it again. And so it's up to us to feel what the impact is and to make a choice.
Great. I'm going to put two questions together since I know we're not going to get to all the many questions that are here. One person, CG, talks about the difficulty with equanimity toward injustice. And the specific example CG cites is the 545 children separated from their parents at the border. And then Eileen asks, could you please speak on equanimity, how it serves us, not as indifference, but how it relates to loving kindness and wisdom? So those are big questions. The first, equanimity in the face of gross injustice, and the other, how does equanimity come into play, and how it relates to loving kindness and wisdom? Big questions.
Yeah, they are good, and certainly really relevant in these times. And I was also very much struck by that story. I'd been thinking about those kids separated at the border even before it came out, and then I was glad to know that other people, it was still in their minds, because it felt like such an egregious situation. So I think equanimity, basically it means a kind of spaciousness of mind, like the space of mind that can hold everything, rather than a reactive mind. So equanimity actually provides the space for us to be able to actually hear these stories, and hear about the suffering without going into, a hyper-reactive mode. But non-reaction doesn't mean non-responsiveness, and people often confuse those two. So there's a Taoist phrase which kind of sums this up, where it said, non-action, which is a kind of a Taoist frame, non-action is not inaction. So non-action is just that space of mind that can hold things in balance, but that does not imply inaction, and it actually provides a balanced foundation for seeing what we can do. And that's where compassion comes in. So all of these qualities, of equanimity and metta and compassion, they all interweave with one another and support each other. So it's really important that the quality of equanimity is a support for our engagement, because without it, it's just so easy to get burned out. Years ago, I spent quite a few years, this is going back quite a few years, of teaching retreats for environmental and social activists who are really on the front lines, of engagement. And the biggest problem that people brought, into the retreat was burnout. Because if we're engaged in a way where the mind is overwhelmed or reactive or full of anger, it's not sustainable. It's not an energy that can keep us engaged. And so to find another way, another possibility, and equanimity is the key. But it is to understand that it does not imply inaction.
I was thinking of Sharon's book, Real Change, which in many ways is all about how to take action, how to engage and stay sane. Is that fair to say, Sharon?
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. Yeah, I was thinking about it too. And I think equanimity is a really tough word to understand. And I think it takes a lot of exploration and investigation, because it does sound to us like indifference or not caring or withdrawing. And it doesn't really mean that. I tell a story in the book, actually, because I've been doing a fair amount of work with the community of people who survived gun violence, and tell a story about the first time I went to Parkland, Florida, and taught. And there was a young woman in the workshop whose mother is a teacher at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, and she wasn't harmed that day, but they didn't know for like 7 hours or something. And so the young woman, Samantha, became very involved in the community and helping people organize the march and something like that. So there we were, I was teaching, and she raised her hand and she said, I'm having a really weird feeling about this day because it's amazing. And I'm really enjoying learning about these techniques and being with you. But I know the only reason it's happening is because that horrible thing happened. And I don't know how to get over that in order to appreciate this. And I said, I don't know if we ever kind of get over it. We just hold them both. And in Buddhist teaching, we'd call it equanimity. It doesn't mean indifference. It doesn't mean withdrawal, but it is. It's like a spacious enough mind to hold them both. So when my book came out on September 1st, and I had a series of panels for the book launch, I had a panel of people from Parkland, and Samantha was on it. So this is like 2 years later. So I said, hey, Samantha, do you remember that conversation we had about equanimity? And she said, not only do I remember it, I think of it every single day. She said, that is like the North Star by which I try to navigate my life. It's, we talked about the yin yang symbol, where the dark is in the light and the light is in the dark. And she said, that's it. And it clearly has not made her less engaged, but hopefully has helped sustain her action.
One of the things I find especially enervating, especially as we approach an election, but not only elections, is attachment to outcome. I find that really burdensome. Will one of you address that?
Actually, that comment goes back to, in some ways, I think my first connection to the Dharma, even though at the time I didn't know it, I was in college, and taking this course in Eastern philosophy. And I knew nothing about, any of this at the time. We were studying the great Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita. And so I was just a college sophomore, but there's one line in it, which for some reason, it resonated so deeply in me, and over these subsequent years, I can understand why. But the line in the Bhagavad Gita was to act without attachment to the fruit of the action. Just that, to act without attachment to the result of the action. And why is this so important? Because we can't control what the outcome necessarily will be. So many forces come into play in terms of how things unfold, and we can do our part, with as wholesome and motivation as possible. But if we're holding on to, the result, a particular result, with attachment, not with interest, it's going to be a cause of frustration and suffering. And so for me, it really highlights the difference between expectation and aspiration. An expectation is wanting a particular result when we want it. And that is a setup for suffering. In every field, it's very noticeable in meditation. If we go into a meditation with an expectation for it to be a certain way, that's not a good approach, because it's going to follow its own laws. But we can have an aspiration, which actually sets a direction for us, and I think that's a much more helpful way of relating to, our unfolding experience.
I think when Joseph says it causes suffering, that expectation or attachment, it's not a problem, because it makes us feel bad. It's that's depleting. Then we give up, and then we feel I can't make a commitment anymore. I can't take action anymore because it's too frustrating. So it's not a question of just trying to feel pleasure all the time by any means. It's a question of being overcome and not being able to keep carrying. Speaking of doing our part, for those of you who are American citizens, I would really urge, and are eligible to vote, I'd really urge you to vote. And James, you're doing a whole thing, aren't you, at Tricycle?
Yes, if you go to our Facebook page, you'll see a lot of different teachers saying why they think voting is important. You can also listen to a series of podcasts I did with Sharon last month about her book, Real Change, which addresses a lot of these issues. But I'm going to try to get 2 more questions in, and yes, vote. Listen to Sharon. I always find that it works out when I do. So I asked you guys earlier, this retreat is going to go deeper, but I said, is it also for beginners? And you said, absolutely. So I'm going to ask you this question. I have trouble understanding, this is from Rusty, I have trouble understanding Buddhist words, what they mean, how they're pronounced, etc. Do you think it's important to spend time and energy understanding these terms? So that sounds like somebody maybe new to the Dharma who might attend a retreat. What do you guys think?
Well, hopefully, something I think is really important, both in terms of using Buddhist terminology, but also in terms of just our ordinary speech, to really define what we mean by certain words. And so we'll certainly be doing that, during the course, particularly with any kind of Buddhist vocabulary, but also even in more general terms, when people talk about freedom, or liberation, or could be anything. Well, what do you mean by that? Or the word desire, a lot of confusion arises in meditation circles because, so much of the teachings is about letting go of desire. But in English, desire has so many different meanings. And so it's confusing. We could say, oh, we have a desire to become more loving, more compassionate. That's not the desire of greed. That's not the desire we have to give up. So the clarification of what's meant by words is really important. And certainly we're going to be trying to do that in the course.
Okay, this question from Eileen is a little bit funny. At the same time, I think it's important if I think about what you said, Joseph, about kind of keeping the gate as to what you take in, you know, at a time like this. So is there any need to watch tonight's presidential?
No, I'm not going to. But on the other hand, I may follow it on Twitter.
Joseph?
I think if there's interest, one should do it. And if there's not interest, there's no need to. But even if there's interest, I find I do have an interest and I probably will watch. But in the last debate, the first debate, I lasted about 25 minutes and just couldn't take any more. And the vice presidential debate, I lasted about 5 minutes. So even if we are interested and start, we're not committed to stay to the end.
Yeah, I don't think you have to think there's a need to, you know, really.
Well, I watched the Lakers and I'm watching the Dodgers now, so together. Okay, so thank you, Joseph and Sharon, for joining us. It was really wonderful and generous of you to spend time with us. And again, Danya Spencer, who puts these together for us, a Tricycle colleague, will once again put in the chat link, but if you don't go to that link, you can go to dharma.org. You can also visit tricycle.org/live to view the recordings of these sessions and to make a donation to support these free offerings of Tricycle. So thank you all for joining us and be well. Any words of farewell, Sharon and Joseph?
I'm looking forward to Joseph leading a sitting.
Yeah, so we're going to just end with a very short sitting, like a couple of minutes, just to let all the words settle, to come back to a place of, you know, some inner stillness. Again, take just a comfortable posture, you know, where the body feels comfortable, relaxed, but also kind of alert. And again, sitting either with your eyes closed or open as you prefer. Maybe take just a few deep breaths, you know, to re-inhabit the body. And settle into the awareness of your whole body sitting. You sit and know you're sitting. In being aware of your sitting posture, you may begin to notice the sensations of the body breathing. Breathing in, know you're breathing in. Breathing out, know you're breathing out. Keep it that simple. Don't be bothered by your thoughts. Simply let them come and go. Mindful of sound when they become apparent. You might spend just a minute feeling the breath at the heart center, that area in the center of the chest. Cultivating a thought or a feeling of loving kindness, of compassion. May all beings everywhere be at peace. Thank you all. Great being together, even in this virtual reality of ours.
Thank you so much, Joseph, and thank you, Sharon. Again, you can see the retreat link, and we'll be having more live streams with teachers who are planning on hosting retreats, so we get to hear about what they're thinking about and hopefully attend those retreats too. So thank you both very much. That was really wonderful.
Great, thank you, James.
Thank you, everybody.